Hi everyone, welcome to Leisrealtalk. Happy Thursday, happy Friday. Um, I did not do a live stream last Thursday. I really enjoy my Thursday night live stream because the weekend is right in front of us. All right, so last during my Tuesday's program, I discussed the chance for India to overtake China as the second largest economy, and I brought up the topic of China's real GDP. This discussion piqued my interest, so I decided to look into what China's real GDP is. And so although this discussion we will be discussing China's GDP, I think we will spend uh, almost half of our time, to talk about the economic impact, the impact of the pandemic on China's economy during the last 3 years, because that's a set of very important variables to determine the real economic the real economic activity, or the level of economic activities in China. So yeah, so we're not just talking about GDP alone. We're really talking about what has happened in the past 3 years, and also what has happened. Some of the assumptions, or some of the problems with the calculations that has been used in calculating China's GDP. So um, China's decades of economic growth is based on a GDP-centric model, right? Right. In terms of measuring a country's wealth and economic strength, GDP is only one of the many indexes. But Beijing is obsessed with GDP growth because it's the only economic indicator that gives Beijing a chance to surpass the United States nominally. And so its latest GDP in 2022 is $18 trillion in US dollars. And it's getting closer to the United States GDP at 2024, or 25 trillion, 24 trillion, 24 and a half trillion. And that's according to China's own data. Now, scholars and economists have been questioning China's real GDP. And when Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, at the end of 2012, China's GDP was 9 trillion. So it has doubled to 18. So the question is, did China really double its economy in the past 10 years? I don't believe so. Many people don't believe it either. But it's getting more and more difficult to verify the numbers. A Financial Times opinion from October last year, and was written by the paper's chief data reporter. I have a picture of that. Here it is. I think his name is John Byrne Murdoch. He's the chief data reporter of the Financial Times. And he claimed that since Xi Jinping became the leader in 2013, thousands of economic data that previously were collected by China's National Bureau of Statistics became discontinued. And by 2016, more than half of the economic indicators were no longer published. I have a chart. So yes. So it just shows the drastic decline in the number of economic or financial indicators that were published by China. And the turning point was 2013, when Xi Jinping became the leader. And so he said that by 2016, more than half of the economic indicators were eliminated. Data such as electricity balance of the provinces, the number of people employed in the outdoor amusement equipment sector, and natural gas exports between the provinces. Those are no longer public information. So why did Xi Jinping stop publishing these data? Was it because China's economy had started to decline and Beijing doesn't want the outside world to know it? It's likely. We'll see that. But I think these are all very interesting reports that I was reading, so I decided to look into it. It's not an easy task, given the limited time, research tools, and the professional help I have. But still, I was able to gather some information that I think is very valuable. With these info, I hope to offer perspective on the real economy of China. I mean, on the real GDP of China, or to normalize the overstated China's GDP. And so the goal of this exercise is to answer the ultimate question: what is China's real GDP at the end of 2022? I used two methods to do this. The first method is based on a study by Professor Martinez from the University of Chicago. He looked at 184 countries between 1992 and 2013 and studied their data on nighttime lights. The data was captured by satellites. So, this data is highly unlikely to be manipulated by governments, because you can't manipulate on a mass level, right? When people turn off their lights. So these are reliable data that government cannot manipulate. And he compared the data to the growth of GDP, the growth of the lights, nighttime lights, to the growth of GDP. And what he found is that when night lights grew, all countries typically also reported GDP growth. However, when making distinctions between autocratic and democratic countries, he saw a clear pattern. That is, autocratic countries. Actually, I have a picture of his study. Oh, here's these are the China's GDP number published by Beijing, and we're not talking about the Martinez method. So, yeah, that's his study. It was originally published in 2017, and he updated it in 2021. And what he found, just to summarize what he found, he said that autocratic countries typically report a 35% higher GDP growth numbers when compared to the nighttime light growth, right? And his main estimates suggest that autocratic countries overstate annual GDP growth by approximately 35%. So, for example, if a true growth rate is 2%, and an autocratic country may inflate that to be at 2.7%. So they inflate that by 35%. So what he meant is there is a GDP growth deflator that we need to apply when we want to normalize GDP growth. So then I applied his percentage. I call this 35% what I call GDP growth deflator. And this is what I did. So what I did is I took China's GDP in 1992, because that's the start of his study, which was at $493 billion. And also and then the latest number is almost 18 trillion, right? And then I calculated the compounded annual growth rate for the 30 years, and it's at 12.7%. So then I reduced that by 35%. I adjusted the annual growth rate to 8.25%. And then I reapplied that to the base number in 1992, and then came up with an adjusted 2022 GDP at $5.3 trillion for China. And this method, I have a note here, assumes that China's GDP numbers were not manipulated before 1992. Okay, so that's the Martinez method. This is shocking, right? It completely changed the narratives that China is the second largest economy, because At 5.3 trillion, it's just slightly higher than Japan's GDP. Japan's GDP last year was at 5.2 trillion. So this is like almost the same. So it's shocking. And so I said to myself, well, this method is too simple. Let me see if I could verify that or validate that from another using a different method. This number needs to be verified. So let me explain my next method. The 3-year pandemic is a major disruptive economic event, right, in the past 10 years. Nothing is as disruptive as the pandemic. So the economic driver or the driver for economic growth from 2020, from the onset of the pandemic to present, were different from the drivers before the pandemic. So I looked at China's GDP growth before and after the pandemic, and the dividing year is 2019. So to find out China's real GDP in 2022, I need to calculate two things. First is the starting point, China's real GDP in 2019, because that's our starting baseline, the starting point for the pandemic. So we need to understand China's real GDP in 2019. Then we need to determine the real growth or contraction during the 3-year from 2020 to 2022. And once we apply the percentage of change, whether it's an uptick or downtick, growth or contraction during the 3 years, to the adjusted 2019 baseline, then we have a rough number of China's real GDP in 2022. So first things first, what was China's GDP in 2019? China's published GDP in 2019 was at 14.3 trillion. I could show you that. This. Right, so this is 14.3 trillion was China's reported GDP. However, a professor, let me see, do I have an, yeah, I call this method Lay's hybrid method. This is my second approach. Oh, I didn't have that slide. So I had a picture of him. So there's a professor from University of Sydney. His name is Salvatore Baboons. And he wrote on Australia's The National Interest about China's inflated GDP in March 2020. You can Google that. His name is Salvatore Baboons, Babones. And he quoted a 2019 study by 4 economists from the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the University of Chicago. The 4 economists took a forensic examination of hard-to-fake data like tax receipts, nighttime light intensity, same measure as the other professor. So they used tax receipts, nighttime light intensity observed from the satellites, electricity generation, railway cargo, and merchandise exports to estimate China's true growth rate from 2008. So their study, they only studied 10 years from 2008 to 2018. Whereas Professor Martinez studied from 1992. It was a much longer period. So this study was only for 10 years from 2008. But it found that China has been over-reporting its growth rate by an average of 1.7% every year, resulting in a 20% overstatement as of the 2018 GDP year. So if you apply the finding of this study to China's GDP in 2019, China's GDP is not at the 14.3 trillion published, but it's only at 11.4 trillion. Now, I think the 11.4 trillion is still overstated because the authors only studied the data for the 10 years from 2008 and onward. And in other words, the adjustment, the 20% adjustment only reflects the overstatement of that 10-year period. It's assuming that the data before 2008 was not manipulated or inflated. But that's highly unlikely, right? We know. So if I use Professor Martinez method, China's GDP in 2019 would be 4.2 trillion, not the 11.4 trillion that this University of Hong Kong economists used. But anyways, let's leave that question on the side. Let's talk about a more important question that I think you're all very interested in finding out. So how much GDP growth, if any, did China have in the past 3 years? Here I want to introduce China's former premier Li Keqiang, who was the head of Liaoning province in 2007. He told then U.S. ambassador to China, Clark Rand, that China's GDP is a man-made number, and he uses it only as a reference. Instead, he used 3 data points to evaluate his province economy, and they are called the Keqiang indexes, and they are electricity consumption, railway cargo volume, and bank lending activities. So those 3 indexes have been given the name. They're called Keqiang indexes, named after him. He said this in 2007 before he was the premier. And it was also before China went into the infrastructure overdrive mode. Remember in 2008, during the economic crisis, China issued 4 trillion money to invigorate the country's infrastructure. So at that time, at the time when Li Keqiang was the head of the Liaoning province, electricity data and banking lending data were good indicators of the economy. But now I think those data have become obsolete because, number one, electricity data has been highly doctored or manipulated. I took a look at China's electricity generation or electricity consumption growth trend, and it basically mirrored China's GDP growth. So I think it's highly manipulated. And also with the CCP, preparing for war, and there's just so much military activities or so much activities in the defense industry, which is very energy consuming. I think the electricity generation may not be a good indication of pure economic activity, although you can argue defense industry activities are also economic part of the GDP. But in a communist state, it may be different. But anyways, and also credit and loan data, I think, no longer measure the real economic activities because local governments and individuals are taking out new loans to pay back old loans on a massive scale. And also, I don't think the data is as reliable as 2007. So what I looked at is the third index he used, which is railway cargo volume. And what I found is there's a study. This is by China Galaxy Securities, and it has this paper that talks about the correlation between GDP and the volume and turnover of passenger and freight transportation. So then that's what I decided to look at. And it says, according to the research results of the World Bank and other research institutes, passenger and freight traffic volume are closely related to GDP. So let me share with you some of the charts I did. I spent a lot of time developing these charts this afternoon. I hope they're helpful. So this is the 3-year passenger traffic volume for railroad from 2019 to 2022. It's passenger trips in billions. And if you compare 2022 to 2019, it's down 54%. Okay. It's very low. 2021 went up slightly, recovered a little bit from 2020, because 2020 was the first year of the pandemic. So you see the drastic change from 2019, right? It dropped. It dropped 40%. And then it went up a little in 2021. That was the year when China reported a huge GDP growth, right? And then 2022, it went down again further. So it's only at 46% of what it was in 2019. And this is for railroad passenger. This is highway passenger. Now, by highway, it may not mean interstate highways. It could mean just all the major roads. So for a lack of a better term to translate that word, I use highway, but it's major road passenger traffic volume. And this is more dramatic. It's reduced by 72%, and it consistently dropped. So people are not on the road. People just are not on the road. And it's just down. And if you compare the first 2 months, I included 2023. If you look at the first 2 months from 2018 all the way to 2023, the trend is continuing. It's not, even though China has completely reopened, it's lower than 2022. So the traffic is very low. It's not going up. And this is passenger trips. So that means people are not on the road and people are not going about. They're not traveling. Let's take a look at, and this is a different way to look at this chart. And it just compares, I think this is, you see the monthly trend. The other chart just shows the annual. This one actually shows the monthly trend for the 6 years. And you see how 2019 was lower than 2018, but at least 2018, 2019 are close. And then come 2020, that's the green bar, and it suddenly dropped in February, right? That's the first major month we were hit by COVID. And then it gradually went up in 2020. But then things started to go down from there. 2021 is the purple line. It has kind of a flat or downward trend. And then 2023 is the, what do you call that color? Blue greenish color. It's lower than 2021. And then 2023 is the orange line only for January. So no matter how you look at it, the amount of people on the road is just down so much. And I think this is very, very alarming. The next slide is freight, because this is a good indicator of commercial activity, whereas the other are just consumer activity. Not necessarily just consumer, but citizen activity, right, at an individual level. This indicates the commercial activity, and it's still down 11% from 2019. It has not, 2021 went up slightly, and it's still 11% down from 2019. So I also took a look at the credit situation, since Li Keqiang did mention lending activities. So I went to look, and I found this Bloomberg report that talks about Chinese banks are inflating their loan numbers. And it talks about somewhere in the beginning of 2022, China's M2 supplies or China's money growth exceeded the credit for the first time. And this is an indication that the loan activity, uh, the credit activity is very low in China. In fact, I saw a report yesterday. Chinese banks, I did a short video on that. Chinese banks are screaming because they got so much deposits in the first quarter of 2023. They said that they've already completed their deposit target for the year. They finished the whole year deposit target in 3 months, but they only met 1/10 of the target for loans, for loan activities. That just shows you, I don't know where did this influx of deposit came from, but maybe people are selling their real estate properties, they're selling their stocks and just put them in banks, because they're losing money in other places. They may think the bank is the safest place. So all of a sudden the banks are seeing this huge amount of deposits coming in, and and there's no one is borrowing money, and that's bad news for banks, because banks make money when loans are issued, because they make interest. So that just shows you it's the credit activity, loan activities are very low. Um, and I also show you these charts last time when this past Saturday, when I talk about whether Beijing is running out of money, and I showed you this chart. I want to quickly talk about that as well. Let me make this bigger. So this is again domestic passenger car sales by year starting from 2012, and you see how it has been going down since 2018. It's all red. The only exception is in 21 and 2022, you have a huge uptick in EV car sales, but gasoline cars sales are continuing down. But so the downward trend of domestic car sales has been ongoing for 5 years. And then if you look at this construction vehicle and freight truck sales, it has been going down since 2012. I think the CCP had a major initiative to boost its infrastructure project in 2016, its infrastructure and real estate project in 2016, 2017. And that's when you see the huge uptick in construction vehicles and freight trucks within that few years. But otherwise, it's consistently down. So the question is, did China's economy, GDP, grew within the past 3 years? I don't think so. So here's my calculation for this hybrid method. So our baseline is adjusted from 14.3 trillion to 11.4 trillion. Our growth, I think China in 2022 was at 70 to 80% capacity, economic capacity of 2019. So, and it has not gone, based on all the numbers I've presented, whether it's passenger traffic, whether it's freight volume, whether it's freight truck sales, or whether it's construction vehicle sales, or whether it's loan, everything is telling me it's not back to the 2019 level. It's only at 70 and 80% capacity at best. So based on that, China's 2022 GDP is between 8 trillion to 9.1 trillion dollars, based on those assumptions. Now, this number may be overstated because this method assumes that China's GDP numbers were not manipulated before 2008. So we know that's highly unlikely. So if you compare this to the Professor Martinez method, the 5.3, so if you factor in, if you adjust, if you apply the GDP, what do you call that? GDP growth deflator from 2008 forward to like 1992, you probably arrive at the same number, somewhere around $5.3 trillion. So I just went through all the numbers with you. It's mind-boggling, right? The numbers are the numbers. I presented you my methodologies. I told you where they come from. So here's a question. So is it really too sensational to claim that China's GDP is at the same level as Japan? Right? I mean, that's basically the conclusion that we came up, based on all the numbers I presented. That seems to be the conclusion. But is that just too sensational? Well, I think the two economies are comparable in size. Compared to Japan, China has a much larger population, but the majority of its population are poor, and not only poor, very poor compared with Japan. And also, China does not have any leading global industrial brands like all the other industrial developed countries do. Like even Taiwan has its brand, right? Every country has their national or global industrial brand that represent the country's industrial capability. So China doesn't have any, and its manufacturing industries rely on imported energy, imported parts, and imported technologies. And what it relies on is also its inexpensive domestic labor force, but the labor force is quickly aging and disappearing. The urban youth don't want to do labor-intensive manufacturing jobs. And if you think about, China's manufacturing industry does not offer much value because it does not own the cutting edge technologies. It's only adding value by providing this massive cheap labor force. So that's one attribute of China's industrialization. And the second thing is a third of its economy is in real estate, which has caused its citizens heavily in debt. And domestic consumption has always been weak. And right now, China is losing exports to industrialized countries like the US, Canada, Japan, and so on. And it's exporting more to Russia and Africa. I talked about that this past Saturday. And local governments are in trouble. So I don't see how its GDP can catch up with the US. So if you say China's economy is about the same size as Japan, although it needs more quantification and justification, but I don't think it's totally, out of reason to say that. But regardless what China's real GDP is, this chart that, let me show you this chart. This chart, so I summarized everything here. Based on CCP's real numbers, it's saying that within the past 3 years during the pandemic, China saw 26% GDP growth from 14.3 to 18 trillion. There was the 26% growth. And I'm saying, no, we didn't have that. First, you need to take out 20% adjustment based on the University of Hong Kong's methodology. And then you need to take out about 25% zero COVID contraction. And so we come to the 8 trillion GDP under the hybrid method. And then the other method is basically at 5.2 or 5.3 trillion. So these are just kind of a visual illustration of everything that I've presented today. So I think the CCP is pushing a pure it's a nice curve that they want to pursue that shows an upward momentum for its GDP to to go up and up to eventually catch up with the United States. But to summarize, I call that a pure mathematical illusion because it's impossible. China's GDP is not at 18 trillion dollars right now, and that's a mathematical illusion. Um, so that ends my endeavor to show you China's GDP. People have asked me about China's GDP for a while. I got the question, I think, in 2021. I'm glad that I spent some time on this. So hopefully this is a starting point. Chinese have an expression, 抛砖引玉. You throw a brick and you bring in jade, right? It just, you throw a rough idea and then many more greater ideas follow that. So I throw a brick. This is only a brick. I hope to see more jade coming in. All right, that's all. Let me see if people have questions. I hope it's not too number intensive. I put on my hat of a former financial analyst and um, and really enjoyed the mathematical aspect of this. All right, let me see if people have questions for me. All right, not a whole lot of question. Let's see. People are deep in thoughts. All right, let me see. From Steve Cam, very impressive analysis, Leigh. I keep hearing Western investment companies speak of the imminent Chinese recovery. I only see a continuous economic retraction or possible collapse. Yeah, I don't know how they come up with the imminent recovery. I don't think they're going to see any growth in 2023. It's only, if you see that, it's only a mathematical illusion. Um, I agree. So let's see. From someone, Donald Laban, Donald Hawk, do you not know what Huawei is? Of course, I know what Huawei is. I said in my program, Huawei is the only Chinese company that came close to be that brand, but unfortunately, it's not a brand that people trust. Right, and also its technology, its technology highly relies on foreign technology. So once the West has banned uh, semiconductors, look what happened to Huawei. So it does not have that. So I mean, it's fragile, it's weak, right? All you have to do is ban some chips and then Huawei cannot survive. So I don't think Huawei is in the same league as companies like Samsung or TSMC. um, it's not in the same league. um, so I have a question from Ed C. How much does investments in infrastructure like high-speed train skew the GDP numbers upward? If you look at the makeup, the mix of China's GDP, I think 36% is domestic consumption. Government spending is under 20%. I think this falls under either this falls under government spending or and a capital maneuver is over 40%. So that could be either the capital is considered investment. Yeah, I think it's considered investment. And then import export is another 30%. Yeah, combined. So this could be part of the investment. Um, all right, from Mike. Thank you for the donation. You see the smile on my face. All right. Hi, Lei. In university, I took a few classes on how climate change impact economies. Would you have any idea of how the 2022 drought heat wave impact China's economy in terms of numbers? Oh, I would have to spend some time quantifying that. It's always we have a major event like that, quantifying it takes some effort. Um, it would be a good, it would be interesting exercise to quantifying all the natural disasters that China has had in the past several years. Um, in terms of impact on its economy. But I don't know if it's easier done. Either said, I think it's easier said than done because we don't have the data. Remember, we lost all the data by Mr. Xi Jinping because he discontinued over 50% of the economic data that the China's National Bureau of Statistics um, was tracking. All right, let me see. Um, Let me see. Oh, Venkat, thank you from Omar Abdullah. First time catching you live from SG, Singapore. SG Singapore, or I think it's a European country. Sorry, half hour late though. So elsewhere that normally GDP is calculated through economic inputs, where CCP's GDP is based on their own fictitious targets, narratives. Yeah, we don't know the formula of its calculation. It does not disclose its formula. So most of the discussion, we cannot challenge its formula because we don't know what it is. All we can do is adjust its growth or normalize its growth or growth assumption based on things that we can measure. Uh, if it shows us the formula of calculation, then of course we could challenge it, right? But we don't know how it's calculated, so that's tough. So we can only say, well, the growth seems to be off, and that's what most of the studies are focused on. It's normalizing the growth rate. I mean, if you think about it, it's amazing when you reduce the percentage of growth by a third within a 30-year. We reduced China's GDP growth from 12% to 8% within 30-year period. The compound factor reduces China's GDP from 18 trillion to 5 trillion. Um, that's just, yeah. Sir Humphrey, thanks, Lei. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let me see. Let me see. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let me see. Any other questions? From Alan Mendel. I see social media posts, some Yangtze River dams at red alert. Do you know anything about this? Also, yeah, the Three Gorges Dam uh, has been on red alert for a while. I mean, during the pandemic, first year of 2020, I've seen satellite photos that show the dam is like twisting. It's not in a straight line. It's in curves, right? The water has pushed it so that it's twisted, and it's scary because if that dam collapse, um, so many lives would be lost, and it's yeah, the country will be flooded. You cannot imagine the tragedy. Shanghai, Shanghai is the last city. It's at the end of Yangtze River, right? Um, even Shanghai will be flooded. So um, it will be. I think it will be the largest human uh, tragedy that we will ever see in modern history. All right. Let me see. From IDK0. Does CCP like to fake their help to the world population, which destroys everything like their groundwater and GDP and China hunger overall? Fake their help to the world pollution, which destroys everything. I'm not quite sure what you mean by fake their help to the world pollution. Um, Pollution in China is a serious problem. This is important. I wanted to make a video on that, but I may as well just talk about it now. Beijing suddenly realized the importance of water resources during war. I saw a talk by one of China's top water expert or water conservancy expert. He's now living in Europe, and he talks about China all of a sudden, is concerned. Beijing is concerned with water, the lack of water resources, and if water is important, is a strategic resource during wartime. Um, and the fact that China relies on so many dams is dangerous, because the water source is not natural, right? And these dams are subject to attacks. So Beijing now realizes that, and it's trying to rely on underground water source. But the problem with the underground water source in China is pollution, because decades ago, someone had the crazy idea of injecting the polluted water, because they didn't know what to do with polluted water, so they injected it to underground. And this is like the worst thing they could ever do to their land, because once it's like uh, pushed all the way into the earth, you cannot take it out. It would take decades, a long time. um, the pollution will always stay there, so people don't know what to do with these polluted underground water. But now, Beijing is issuing new initiatives and spending money to order their engineers to come up with a solution to discover more underground water resources. It's like, why did you pollute it in the first place? So that just shows you how it's just the communists. I think that everything they touch becomes a disaster. So yeah, water is a strategic resource now for Beijing. Um, so I just answered the question about underground water. Um, Let me see. Like economic effect. Okay. SGD is from Singapore. Okay. All right. Wow. Let me see. There are a lot of discussions amongst yourselves. Great. Let me see. Any questions? Oh, from Bila Bing. Thank you. From Benji C. Lei, thank you for your analysis. Sorry to repost. How much of a role do you think the big tech companies in China, Alibaba, Meituan, Didi, will play in driving China's economy after crackdown? Um, Meituan and Didi are not doing well because the people don't have money. There's an oversupply. If you just look at I mean, people need to have money to order food, right? To eat out, and people need to have a reason to take Uber. I mean, China, it's Didi, and you saw the number I presented. The passenger traffic volume in China declined by 73% in January and February of 2023. When compared with 2019. So when people have no need to go out, do you think Didi would do well? I don't think so. I do not think Didi and Meituan would do well at all. Um, and the other important factor that I did not mention is the reason I think the economy is suffering so much is because of the loss of population. I did not talk about that. Maybe somewhere, maybe this Saturday, I'll talk about the loss of population. Remember this chart that I showed you? This. Let me make this bigger. The more I look at this, okay, The more I think it's the result of the loss of population during the pandemic. Again, I discussed this before. China lost a huge number of people. There's a huge number of people who died during the pandemic, but it's being covered up by the government. Otherwise, you can't explain this kind of drop in traffic. Road traffic is 72% down in 2023. It's consistently going down. And it's lower than 2020. I mean, we could imagine 2020 was really bad, but it's got to be higher than 2020. But it's lower than 2020. So to me, that means China, there's a huge casualty. The mortality rate is much, much higher than stated. China's population is not 1.4 billion. So this chart tells me there's a huge loss of population, and that's another topic. So sorry, let me come back. All right, so any other questions? I kind of lost my place. Is employment down to match consumption? Employment is very bad right now. I talked about how, the graduates' employment is only 30%, 32% in Shanghai. And that means unemployment is 68% for college grads. And you have 12 million college grads in China this year. That means 3/4 of them or 2/3 of them will not be able to find a job. That's 8 million people, right? That's 8 million people. And so you have 8 million this year, 8 million last year. If you add them up, that's a huge number of young people who don't have a job in China. All right. So I think from Ed C. Do you think Xi Jinping will ever be held accountable for the evils and stupidity of zero COVID? Well, has there ever been any CCP leaders ever been held accountable for anything they did? Cultural Revolution, Tiananmen Square massacre, COVID-19 in the first place, right? I mean, zero COVID is the reactive policy to COVID-19. Never. They're always right. They're always, they were never held accountable for anything. All right. So that's all for tonight. And thank you, everyone. It's just my endeavor. I hope I throw a brick, and I hope to see more jade, more pieces of jade coming in. So I hope this community uh, can come up with better numbers or better methodologies than what I had presented to quantify China's GDP. All right. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.